Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We'll be learning today in Yirtzeh Hashem, I am hoping, Daf Zayin Amid Aleph and a good piece of Daf Zayin Amid Beis. Okay, so we begin today on the top line of the Shulchan Aruch on Zayin Amid Aleph with a brand new Siman Taf Kuf Lamed Zayin, Din Meleches Davar Ha'aved Ubay Tez Zayin Seifim, the halachas that pertain to a Davar Ha'aved. We're used to hearing this term on Chol HaMoed when we go and ask a shayla if there's something, are we allowed to do something on Chol HaMoed? And we always know that if it's a davar ha'aved, if it's something that may cause us significant loss if we do not perform melachah on Chol HaMoed, then very often the halacha is that we are allowed to do melachah to avoid a significant loss. So here we have the Siman in Shulchan Aruch that discusses the halachas of a davar ha'aved. So din meleches davar ha'aved, the halachas that pertain to a davar ha'aved, ubay tez zayin seifim, and here we have 16 seifim. Says the mechaber in Sif Aleph, davar ha'aved mutar la'asaysay b'chol HaMoed b'loy shinui. When we're faced with a davar ha'aved, let's take a look right away at the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Aleph. What is a davar ha'aved? Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ritzayna loymar. What the mechaber wants to say over here is, she'im lo ya'asehu achshav. If we're faced with a situation where if we do not do a melachah right now, achshav, if we don't do it now, yavai lidei hefsid, we're going to come to a financial loss. In that case, says the mechaber, davar ha'aved mutar la'asaysay b'chol HaMoed b'loy shinui. Then you're allowed to do the melachah that you need to do in order to avoid taking a loss, and you're allowed to do it without a shinui. You could do it in the perfectly normal way that you always do it. You don't have to perform it in any kind of different way. Now let's continue the Chavetz Chaim, the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Aleph. V'im hadavar etzloi b'safik. Let's say you have a safik. It's a situation of a doubt. You don't know for sure that you're going to end up experiencing a loss, but you have a tzad. It could be that you're going to suffer a loss if you don't do a melachah on Chol HaMoed. Then Ayin b'Magen Avram, the Chavetz Chaim says, take a look in the Magen Avram, Shemekel, where the Magen Avram rules leniently, and he says, even if you have a suffix of a davar ha'aved, you're allowed to do melachah on Chol HaMoed in order to avoid that loss. B'chayadam kasav, the Chayadam writes, Sheya'aseyu al yidei akum v'loy ba'atzmai, that if you're faced with a suffix, you should do the melachah that's necessary to do in order to avoid this possible loss. You should do it through a non-Jew instead of doing it yourself. However, v'ayin b'bir halacha, the Chavetz Chaim says, take a look what I wrote in this lengthy bir halacha divrei maschil davar ha'aved, shetzidadnu, that over there in the bir halacha we lean towards saying, the kavanas ha'magen Avram hu gamkein im oisach shash hu chayshesh hu matzui sheyavoy. The intent of the Magen Avram, when the Magen Avram says that you could be makel by a suffix of a davar ha'aved, he's talking about a case where it is probable that the loss will take place. It's a chash matzui. It's very probable that you will suffer the loss, and that's when the Magen Avram is makel. Va'az nireh diyesh lahakel gam al yidei atzmai, and in such a case it seems that you could be makel and you could do the necessary malacha even on your own without doing it through the agency of a non-Jew. Achein, however, yira la'asois b'tzina im efsher, if possible, in such a case, you should do the malacha that you need to do b'tzina, you should do it discreetly. V'ayin b'Pri Megadim, Chavetz Chaim says, take a look at the Pri Megadim, Shakasav, who writes, the L'divrei HaMagen Avram, yesh lahakel nami b'safik tzarech HaMoed. We see over here that the Magen Avram is saying, in the case of a davar ha'aved, you're allowed to do melachah on Chol HaMoed. We also know that there are times that you're allowed to do melachah on Chol HaMoed when it's tzarech HaMoed. Now the Magen Avram is telling me that if you have a suffix davar ha'aved, you're allowed to do melachah. So too, says the Chavetz Chaim in the name of the Pri Megadim, the same rule would apply if you have a suffix if something is tzarech HaMoed. You're not sure if you're going to need this for the moed or not. If you have a suffix tzarech HaMoed, you could be makel according to the Magen Avram, and you could do the malacha, you could assume that it's a tzarech HaMoed. V'hainu gamkein im be'einav karev sheyez al tzarech HaMoed, But again, the same way we said that according to the Magen Avram is makel by a suffix davar aved if it's probable, so too by a suffix tzarech hamoed. You could be makel if it's probable that this will be a tzarech hamoed. Okay, so far we have over here in the Mechaber told us this rule that if you're faced with a davar aved, if you're faced with a situation where if you do not perform melachah on Chol HaMoed, you're going to take a loss, or according to the Magen Avram, there's a suffix if you're going to take a loss, but it's very probable that you're going to take a loss. In that case, you are allowed to do melachah, and you could do it without any kind of shinui. Now, of course, we're going to qualify this somewhat in the coming seifim of this siman. But first, why is it that you're allowed to do melachah in the case of a davar aved? Why are you allowed to do melachah to avoid a loss? So take a look at the Dirshu footnote number 3. Ubetam hadavar shehitiru malacha b'chol HaMoed l'tzarech davar aved. As far as the reasoning, the rationale, why you're allowed to do malacha on Chol HaMoed to avoid a loss, Kasav HaRitva, the Ritva writes by Katan Yud Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, the Ramaschal Alam Rav Ashi, she'isar malacha b'moed. Why do we have an isser malacha on Chol HaMoed? Hu mishum tircha. The reason we have an isser malacha on Chol HaMoed is because we don't want you to be busy doing your malacha on Chol HaMoed. Ukedei shaloi lemayit b'simchas haregel. If Chol HaMoed would be a regular weekday and everybody's going to work and everybody's busy with the things that they're ordinarily busy with, or even if you're not going to go to work, but you're going to be busy cleaning out your garage, so you're going to be busy with all sorts of tirchas, you're going to be memayit in simchas yamtiv. Like this, you're free from doing malacha, so you sit down, you have a nice suda, you do things, you spend time with the family, you spend extra time in shul, you spend extra time in the bismedrash, so you have a moed, you have a yamtiv. But if you wouldn't have any isser malacha at all, it could turn chas v'chalil into a regular weekday. So that's the whole reason why we have an isser malacha on Chol HaMoed. In that case, says the Ritva, ulefikach, therefore, meleches davar aved, when it comes to doing malacha to avoid a loss, hitiru chachamim. The Chazal said it's mutter to do malacha to avoid a loss. Why? Kedei shelo yidag al avedasai, so that you shouldn't be worried about the loss that you're going to take. V'yimna misimchas yamtiv. In other words, to put it succinctly, what the Ritva is saying is, the whole reason you have an isser malacha on Chol HaMoed is to protect simchas yamtiv. We want to make sure you're not busy with all sorts of other things, and instead you're spending the time on simchas yamtiv. But if you're gonna, if the isser malacha is going to make you take a financial loss, that's also going to take you away from simchas yamtiv. You're going to be sitting and fretting about the financial loss that you're going to take. So in order to protect simchas yamtiv, in that case, they said, do the malacha that you need to do in order to take care of the davar aved and to get that off of your mind. Excuse me. So that's based on a ritva. Other Rishonim that are not brought down here in the footnote say a little bit differently. And they send us back to Siman Taf Kuf Lamed. If you go to Beis Amud Aleph, Siman Taf Kuf Lamed, Sif Aleph, in the Mishnah Berurah, almost down near the bottom, Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Beis. The Mishnah Berurah brings down a Yerushalmi. He says, Issa b'Yerushalmi, it's brought down in Yerushalmi in Moed Katan Perek Beis, Halacha Gimel. Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Maimel, Rabbi Amar Bar Maimel said, Ilu hayamisha yamana imi, if there would be somebody who would be willing to be counted with me, hitarti shiwais in malacha b'Chol HaMoed, I would have been matir certain malacha on Chol HaMoed, v'hainu mekach u'memkar, u'kai gavna, davar she'ena malacha gemura. Why? Klum asar lasais malacha. Why is there an issa malacha? Elo kadesh yu oichlin v'shaisin v'yigain b'Torah, so that people should spend their time on Simchas Yamtiv, and they should be yigain b'Torah. They should spend extra time learning Torah. Now skip a little bit. The kasav hakolboi. Oh, you don't have to read this over here. But the point is, again, kadesh yu oichlin v'shaisin v'yigain b'Torah. There's a concept, there's an inyan on Chol HaMoed to spend more time being Isaac in Torah, Rabbi say. And therefore, say other Rishonim, that another reason why Chazal were mater malacha by a davar aved is not only to protect Simchas Yamtiv, but it's also to protect limud HaTorah. If somebody is going to be busy fretting over a financial loss that he's going to suffer, it's going to take his mind off of Torah. He's not going to be able to concentrate on the daf. He's not going to be able to concentrate on the Dirshu Mishnah Berurah. So in order to protect from that, they said it's mutter to do melachah to avoid a financial loss, and the davar of it is mutter. Now, another thing I want to point out, that the Dirshu points out in this sifkatan of the Mishnah Berurah, is the Chavetz Chaim brought down the Magen Avram. And he said in the name of the Magen Avram, if you have a suffix davar of it, you're not sure if you're going to suffer a loss or not, the Magen Avram says, if that loss is probable, you could go ahead, it's mutter to do melachah on Chol HaMoed, in this case of suffix davar of it. And the Mishnah Berurah said, Achein yira lasos b'tzina im efsher. In that case, you should do the melachah b'tzina. You should do it discreetly, if at all possible. If you take a look in the Mishnah Berurah, in the Dirshu, footnote number 5, they bring down a very nice diuk over here. Mevur midvarav, it's clear from the words of the Chavetz Chaim, shedafka kishu suffik davara avid yira lasos b'tzina, that it's only in the case of the Magen Avram when you're dealing with a suffix davara of it. That's when you have to take care to do the necessary melachah b'tzina. Aval kishu davara avid shahuter b'mayit. But when we're dealing with a bona fide davar ovid, where we know for sure that we're dealing with a davar ovid, and we want to do malacha to avoid a loss, ain't sarach lasos b'tzina, then it's not necessary to do the malacha b'tzina. You could do the malacha full on, without a shinui, in public. You don't have to do it b'tzina. V'ukedas ha-Magid Mishnah, and this is brought down from a Magid Mishnah. Okay, let's go weiter. Top line of the Shulchan Aruch says the Ramah in the parentheses here. So you're allowed to do malacha in the case of a davar of it. Miu, however, whatever you could do in order to lessen the amount of tercha, the amount of exertion and busyness you're going to have when you do this malacha, in the case of a davar of it, you should make it as little as possible. It's still Chol HaMoed. Don't say, it's a davar of it, now I'm going to put on my jeans and put on my work boots and I'm going to get fully involved in work. Try to be mimayit in the malacha and the tercha as much as you can. Okay, now, based on this heter, that you're allowed to do malacha for a davar of it, now we're going to go into a somewhat lengthy discussion, which is going to give us the rules of doing malacha for a davar of it, and it's based on the question of whether or not you're allowed to water a field in different types of instances. Let's remember, watering a field is a malacha. It's the melachah of Zayreya. It's very often also the melachah of Chayrish, because you're preparing the ground for planting and for growing, and you're making the seeds, the saplings and everything grow better. So very often it involves two melachas, Zayreya and Chayrish. So certainly watering a field is a malacha. So to water a field on the Moed, on Chol HaMoed, would be a shaila. But sometimes it's a davar of it. So that's the way the rules of this are going to be couched in the terms of fields. Let's go weiter here in the Shulchan Aruch on the second line. Lefikach, since we have this heter of doing malach in the case of a davar of it, beis hashlachin, if you have a field of the type which is called a beis hashlachin, Pirush, says the Ramah, what does that mean? Haaretz hatzmeya. If you have a dried out field, a beis hashlachin is a field that requires irrigation. It's not naturally irrigated. The rainwater that it's going to get is not sufficient. If you want to use this field to grow things, to grow crops, you need to irrigate it, you need to water it. Interestingly enough, this terminology, beis hashlachin, we know that the Targum, in the parsha of Amalek, we learn it, parsha Zachar, Oyef v'yageya, tired out and worn out. The Targum says mishalhe, worn out. Shale is tired, worn out, dried out, no lechus. There's no moisture there anymore. So the terminology beis hashlachin comes from the Aramaic mishalhe, dried out. So lefikach, beis hashlachin pirush haaretz hatzmeya, a dried out field that requires irrigation. Shehischil lahashkaisa kaidam hamoed, and you already began to irrigate this field before Yom Tov began. So you have crops growing in this field. and you already started watering them. You have things growing and they've already been watered before Yom Tov, mutter lahashkaisa. Now it's permissible to irrigate and to water that field on Chol HaMoed. Why? Because since you already started to water this field before Yom Tov, if you don't water it now on Chol HaMoed, tipased, it will become lost. It will become ruined and you will take a loss. So this is a davar ha'aved. If you have a field that requires irrigation and you already started to water it, so now the seedlings and everything are taking root and they're growing and they already expect water, they're already used to receiving water. If you stop watering it now on Chol HaMoed, everything's going to dry out and die out. So now it's a davar ha'aved. So now you're allowed to water it on Chol HaMoed. Now we'll see how you're allowed to water it. But you are allowed to water it on Chol HaMoed. But now let's contrast that, says the Mechaber. Avol stay habal, but if you have a field that does not really require irrigation, really it gets sufficient irrigation naturally from rainwater. Avol stay habal, she'ein mashkenoisa elo lahashpicha yoiser, which is a field that you only water manually in order to improve it and to make the crops either grow better or more. Either they're going to grow bigger, or they're going to grow faster, or they're going to produce better produce. So you're watering it not because if you don't water it, it's going to die out. It's going to be fine if you don't water it. But by watering it, you want to improve it. That's not a davar ha'aved. So stay abal she'ein mashkenoisa elo lahashpicha yoiser. In the case of a stay abal, where you're only watering it in order to improve it, asar lahashkaisa, then you're not allowed to water it on Chol HaMoed because that is not a davar ha'aved. Okay, that was quite a bit. Let's take a look at what the Mishnah Berurah says. Let's take a look at Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Beis Haaretz Hatzmeya. The Ramah defined the Beis Hashlachin as a dried out field. Va'ayef alamayim. It's thirsty for water. She'em lo yashkena tamid tipased. Now, if you don't continue irrigating it, it's a Beis Hashlachin. It's thirsting for water. If you don't give it water, it's going to dry out and die. Ois Katan Gimel. This is only a problem if you started watering it before Yom Tov. If you didn't start watering it before Yom Tov, then you're not allowed to water it in Chol HaMoed because it doesn't require the water. It won't become ruined if you don't water it. But if you started watering it before Yom Tov, then you could water it on Chol HaMoed. It explains the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Gimel, she'keven shehischil, since you started watering it before Yom Tov. Avalim loy hischil, if you didn't start watering it before Yom Tov, loy tipased, it's not going to become ruined al yidei ichor eze yamim, from the fact that you're going to delay beginning to water it for several days until after Yom Tov. V'aser, and in that case it's not a davar ha'aved, you have no heter to water it on Chol HaMoed, and it's aser, it's prohibited. Ois Katan Daled, stay habal, if we're dealing with a stay habal, Chavetz Chaim defines stay habal, Pirish Shedai Lo Bimtar Hashamayim, a field that does not require manual irrigation. It gets sufficient watering from the rain. Then you're not allowed to water it on Chol HaMoed because it's not a davar ha'aved. Okay, now let's go to Sif Beis. Says the Mechaber. So we said that you're allowed to water a Beis Hashlachin. You have a Beis Hashlachin that you began to water before Yom Tov. Now it's a davar ha'aved if you don't water it on Yom Tov. So you're allowed to on Chol HaMoed, not on Yom Tov, on Chol HaMoed. So now you're allowed to water it on Chol HaMoed. You know, I'm not listening back to myself, but I hope I don't slip up too often and say Yom Tov instead of Chol HaMoed. Let's realize that whenever we speak about a heter melachah, we're learning Hilchas Chol HaMoed. We're talking about a heter melachah on Chol HaMoed. We're not talking about a heter malacha on Yom Tov. I realize I just slipped up now. So we have a heter, davar ha'aved, a Beis Hashlachin. You started to water it before Yom Tov. You're allowed to water it on Chol HaMoed because if you don't, it's a davar ha'aved. Now says the Mechaber here in Sif Beis, afilu Beis Hashlachin, that you started to water before Yom Tov and now you're allowed to water it on Chol HaMoed, lo yitiru, the Chazal will not matter you to water it on Chol HaMoed, ella heicha deleka tircha yisera. Very important rule. Only in an instance where the watering it is not going to be a tircha yisera. It's not going to be excess exertion. It's going to be lightweight tircha. It's not going to be major tircha. Kigain, for example, min hama'ayin. Let's say you have a natural spring. So you have a source of water, which is a natural flowing spring. So you have a ma'ayin. How do you water the field from the ma'ayin? You have this spring that flows near your field. All you need to do is you need to unblock something so that the water from the spring should flow into an irrigation ditch, and now the water is going to flow into your field. Or maybe, case that the Chazal give, is maybe what you need to do is you need to take your foot and you need to make a depression in the ground between the spring and your field. You're going to kick out or step out a little bit of an irrigation canal with your foot so that the water will come from the spring and it will flow over into your field. But you're not going to go take buckets and start schlepping buckets. That you're not going to do. So, says the Mechaber, afilu bebeis hashlachin, even by this beis hashlachin where you have a heter to irrigate it because it's a davar ovid, lo yitira lahechad delechet tercha yisera. It's only mutter in a case where it's not excess exertion. Kigain, for example, min hama'ayin, if you have a natural flowing spring, bein chadash, bein yashan, whether it's a new spring that just cropped up over here and it just started flowing, or it's an old established spring. And we'll see in the Mishnah Berurah what's the difference. Why is the Mechaber making this point? Shehu mamshicha yu mashke. In the case of a natural spring, all you're doing is shehu mamshicha, you're mamshich the water. You draw the water to your field by making a depression in the ground or by unblocking something, umashke, and then the water comes and it waters the field. Avol, however, lo yidle, you can't take a bucket and start drawing water with a bucket, v'yashke, and start watering your field manually, min habrecha, from a pond, a retention pond of rainwater, or from a drainage ditch that holds rainwater. So you cannot say, I have a beis hashlachin that I started to water before Yom Tiv. If I don't water it on Chol HaMoed, it's a davar ovid. So now I'm allowed to go do whatever I want to do. So I have a cistern full of rainwater. I'm going to go get my bucket, start drawing buckets, schlepping it to the field, pouring it over. No, that's tircha yisera. That you're not allowed to do. You're only allowed to do a lightweight tircha. You have a natural spring near your field. You could do a lightweight tircha to be mamshich the water, to draw the water over to your field, let it flow into the field, and let it water the field. But that would be a tarech gadol. That's us. So here we're going to have one of the great rules of a davar ovid, which is, yes, you're allowed to perform melachah on Chol HaMoed in order to avoid a davar ovid, in order to avoid a financial loss, but not if it's a tercha yisera. If it's excess exertion, then it's aser on Chol HaMoed, even in the case of davar ovid. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah here in Ois Cotton Hay. Bein Chadash, the Mechaber said, you could draw the water to your field from a natural flowing spring, whether it's a new spring or it's a yashan, or it's an established spring. What's the difference? Let's says the Mishnah Berurah. Bein Chadash, whether it's a new spring, shehischel linvaya me Chadash, that just recently started flowing. V'kamash malan, and what the Mechaber is teaching me here, when the Mechaber tells me that you're allowed to draw water even, and I'm not talking about with buckets. Remember, when I say draw water, it only means to do something to allow the water to flow to your field. The Kamash Malan, when the Mechaber tells me that this is mutter even in the case of a new spring, he's teaching me that we are not concerned, that since it's a new spring, dilma yiplu kisalav. When we have a new spring that's flowing, water never, when you have an old established stream, the canal, the pathway of the stream is very worn out. It's very well established. Even if something happens and it doesn't rain for 3 months, the pathway of the stream is not going anywhere. When the water starts to flow again, it's going to flow right in the bed. That's the word I'm looking for. The stream bed is well established. The water is going to continue flowing when it starts up again. But if it's a newly established spring, then the bed, the canalway, the pathway of the stream is not established. Maybe we should worry, Dilma Yiplu Kisalov, maybe even though the stream is running now, maybe the walls of the stream will collapse, and now your water source will get choked up. And then what's going to happen? If we're going to tell you that you're allowed to use a newly established spring in order to water your Beis HaShlachin on Chol HaMoed, so you're going to say, oh, beautiful. I could go out now and I could take my foot, I could cut a little irrigation ditch from the spring, and I could let it flow into my Beis HaShlachin. You're going to go out, you're going to start doing it. Suddenly the walls of the stream are going to collapse. No more water. Now you're going to say, oh, okay, I'll go to the brecha, I'll go to the cistern with my Home Depot bucket, and I'll start taking buckets of water. But that you're not allowed to do because that's a terchi yisera. But once you're involved already in irrigating your field, you might come to do the terchi yisera. So the Mechaber is teaching me that you don't have to, we're not worried about this. Even if it's a new spring, we're not worried that the walls are going to collapse, and then you're going to come to go do a terchi yisera. Inami, also possibly, what the Mechaber is teaching me is, Dilma asir la'asuye mi makam acher. Oh, I'm sorry. The first concern was va'asir l'sakin mamayit. Not that you're going to go get your Home Depot bucket. When the walls of the stream collapse, you're going to go get a shovel, and you're going to start digging out the pathway of the stream to reestablish it and let the water flow, which would be a terchi yisera. That was one possible concern. The other possible concern is the first one I said. Inami, or we might be concerned, Dilma asir la'asuye mi makam acher. You might get your Home Depot bucket and start drawing water from a well or from a cistern. And that would again be a terchi yisera. So Kamash Malon, the Mechaber says you're even allowed to use a mayin chadash. You're even allowed to use a new spring, and we're not worried about either of these possible problems. Ois Cotton Vav, the Mechaber said, but what are you not allowed to do? The Mechaber said, Avalo yidle v'yashkem in abrecha imei agishamim mikubatzim. You're not allowed to go take from a brecha. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ois Cotton Vav, what's a brecha? Mayim mechunasin bibar amoik. This is water that's gathered, that's held in a deep cistern, in a bar. Ve'havit terchi yisera. To water your field from that brecha, from that well, that involves a terchi yisera, shetzarech lidlois bekli. Because what are you going to do? You're going to get a bucket, lower a bucket in, and pull a bucket up. That's already a terchi yisera that you're not allowed to do even for a davar avid. Or is cotton zayin mimei ageshamim, from a rainwater pond. Va'afilu eina doila. Now, over here says the Chavetz Chaim, when the Mechaber tells you that you're not allowed to take mimei ageshamim mikubatzim, afilu eina doila, even if you're not going to draw it up with a bucket. Ela mamshich mehen baregel, even if you're going to do the same exact thing that you were planning on doing with your mayim. We said that if you have a natural flowing spring near your field, you could water your Beis HaShlachin on Chol HaMoed. Why? Because it's not a terchi yisera. All you're going to do is take your foot, you're going to stamp out a little irrigation canal, the water's going to flow. No problem. How about if I want to do the same thing? I have a pond that fills up with rainwater. So I've got this beautiful, full, overflowing, well, not overflowing, but almost overflowing pond. And again, all I want to do is take my foot and stamp out a little irrigation canal. So what's the difference? Says the Chavetz Chaim, no, that you're not allowed to do. Even if you're going to draw the water from the cistern or from the rainwater pond with your foot, the same way you would do it from a natural spring, it's still usher. You have a rainwater pond or a cistern that's filled up to its banks, and all you got to do is stamp out a little canal, so that you don't have to draw the water with a bucket. Still usher. It's still usher. Why? Mipnei shesoifai lidlois kishayechseru. Because what's going to happen? You're going to make an irrigation canal. Now the water is going to flow out of the pond and it's going to flow into your field. But an hour later, the water level in the pond is going to go down. And now it's not going to flow into your field anymore. And now you're going to go get a bucket. And you're going to end up, the water level is going to go down. So you're going to get a bucket and you're going to start drawing water with a bucket out of the pond. That's not a problem by a natural spring. A natural spring is continuously flowing. So by a natural spring, you're just going to stamp out an irrigation canal and the water is going to flow into your field and now you're done. And we're not afraid that the water level is going to go down. Why should the water level go down? It's a continuously flowing natural spring. Masha Einkein by the Brecha or by the Megashamim Mikubatzim, that's a pond that's holding whatever rainwater it has in it. And when you allow that water to flow out into your field, eventually the water level is going to go down. And then eventually you're going to end up drawing with a bucket. So that's why the Brecha and the Megashamim Mikubatzim are usher. They're usher either because from the get-go you're going to do it with a bucket, or even if it's very full and you don't have to do it from the get-go with a bucket, we're afraid that eventually you're going to end up doing it with a bucket when the water level goes down. And continues the Chavetz Chaim, and he says, Umima'ayin nami, and even by the natural spring, when we tell you that you're allowed to water your Beis HaShlachin from the natural spring because it's a davar ha'ovid, umima'ayin nami b'hamshacha beraglav shari lahashkais. It's only mutter to use your foot and draw the water into an irrigation canal. But if you want to go ahead and take your Home Depot bucket and fill up water from the natural spring and then bring it to your field and pour it over, that would be asur. The same way it's asur to do that from a brecha, from a pond or from a cistern, it's asur to do that from a natural spring as well. So to put this succinctly, what have we learned over here? You're allowed to go ahead and water your Beis HaShlachin on Chol HaMoed if you started to water it before Yom Tov, because if you don't water it, it's a davar ha'ovid. How are you allowed to do it? Only with a lightweight level of exertion, only with a tercha ketana. For example, if you have a natural spring that's near your Beis HaShlachin, so that all you need to do is cut a little irrigation canal with your foot, and the water will flow out of the natural spring, and it will flow into your field and water it. Or all you have to do is just unstop something and allow the water to flow into your field. Fine, you're allowed to do that. How about if you don't have a natural spring, but you have a rainwater pond nearby? Could you scratch out a little irrigation canal and let the water come from the pond? No. Why? Because if you do that, eventually you're going to end up coming and drawing water out of it with a bucket when the water level goes down. You're also not allowed to do it with a bucket from the get-go. You're also not allowed to use a bucket from the natural spring. And by the natural spring, we're not worried that the water level is going to go down because it's a continuously flowing natural spring. It doesn't stop. It keeps on going. So we're not afraid you're going to end up using a bucket. And the great rule that we see from here is that even by a davar ha'ovid, you're not allowed to do melachah on Chol HaMoed if it's a tircha yisera. A tircha yisera you're not allowed to do even by a davar ha'ovid. Now, in Dirshu footnote number 10, he brings down an interesting question. Brings down over here, how about if you have a natural spring? So he said a natural spring, you're not allowed to draw the water with a bucket. How about if you have a machine? Nowadays we have machines. You have a machine that pulls water from a natural stream and brings it to your field. Are you allowed to use that machine? You're not allowed to use a bucket. Are you allowed to use a machine? So he brings down over here from the Chazon Ish that you are allowed to use a machine. Maybe we should be chayshish. Maybe the machine will break down. And if the machine breaks down, then maybe you'll go take a bucket and you'll draw the water with a bucket out from the stream and bring it to your field. So the Chazon Ish says over here, Mikol Mokem ein an yuchelim ligzar ma'isha lo gazru chachamim. The chachamim didn't make xeris by a machine. They made xeris by buckets. They didn't make xeris by machines. Okay. This took a little bit longer than I expected it to, but I want to push over onto Zayin Amud Beis. We still have some time here. Let's continue on the bottom line of the Shulchan Aruch, right by the Mishnah Berurah, is Katan Ches. Afilu aruga achas. Let's say you have one row in your field, one row of cucumbers. Chetzya gavaya, and it's on a slope. Part of it is high, the chetzya namuch, and part of it is lower down. Ein doilim mimakim namuch lahashkais makim gavaya. Let's say the lower part of the cucumber row over here has a natural water source, and the water is flowing onto the lower half of the cucumber row. And now what I want to do is I want to take a bucket and I want to bring some water up to the high part of the cucumber row. No, you're not allowed to do that. Says the Mechaber, you're not allowed to do that. You can't take ein doilim. You can't take water with a bucket. You can't draw water mimakam namuch from the low part lahashkais makam gavaya in order to water the high part. Back on Zayin Amud Aleph, it says the Mishnah Berurah is Katan Ches. Afilu aruga achas, even if you have one row, says the Chavetz Chaim, the Chol Sheken kishem shtei arugos. Certainly, if it's two separate rows of cucumbers, va'achas gavaya mechaverta, and one row is higher than the next one, ein doilin me'atachtoina lahashka yisrael yoina. You're not allowed to draw water from the lower one in order to water the upper one. V'im haya aruga shel yerek, if you have a row of cucumbers, v'kavanasai kidei la'achlan b'mayid, that you want to water l'tzarech hamayid, I need cucumbers for my salad on Chol HaMoed or on Yom Tov, then mutter. Then all of this is mutter, like we'll see later on in Sif Daled, and we'll discuss that in greater detail over there. Okay, top line, Zayin Amud Beis, the Mechaber Sif Gimel. Naharais hamoishchin min ha'agamim. Now the word naharais, we're used to the word nahar, meaning a river. That's not really what it means over here. It means irrigation canals. Naharais hamoishchin min ha'agamim. You have irrigation canals that flow to your field from an agam. An agam is a pond or a swamp that is full of rainwater. It doesn't have a natural water source. The source of the water is rainwater. That's an area where rainwater naturally collects, and you have irrigation canals that run to your field from those agamim. Naharais hamoishchin min ha'agamim. Mutter lahashkais mehen beis hashlachin b'mayid. You're allowed to water your beis hashlachin. Again, it's talking about a beis hashlachin, a field that requires manual irrigation, that you started to water before Yom Tov, and therefore it's a davar of it if you don't water them. Mutter lahashkais mehen beis hashlachin b'mayid. You're allowed to water the beis hashlachin using these irrigation canals. Now that, on face value, seems strange. We just said over here in Sif Beis that you're not allowed to water your field from mayim, from mei gishamim mikubatzim. You have a pond, a pond of rainwater, and you either want to take a bucket and take water out and bring it to your field. That's certainly aser, terchi yisera. You want to cut a little irrigation canal from the pond of rainwater and let the rainwater flow to your field. Also aser. Why? Because even though what you're doing right now is not a terchi yisera, we're afraid that the pond of rainwater, the water level is going to go down, and you're going to end up doing a terchi yisera. Now, in this scenario, what are we talking about? We're talking about you have established irrigation canals that come to your field, and they're fed from natural agamim, from natural ponds or swamps that are fed by rainwater. Now we're saying you're allowed to water your field from those irrigation canals. You're allowed to use those irrigation canals. Why? Explains the Mechaber. He says, V'hu shaloi pasku. This is talking about a very specific scenario. We're talking about a case where it's already very well known and very established that these irrigation canals and the swamps and the ponds that feed them do not dry up. This is based on a Gemara in Moed Katan and Daf Daled that discusses such a scenario. And it says over there, you're allowed to water your fields from these irrigation canals. And the Gemara asks the question, why? Why aren't we afraid that they're going to dry up? Why aren't we afraid that you're going to end up going and drawing water with buckets from somewhere else and doing a terchi yisera? And the Gemara's answer is, we're talking about the agamim of Bavel, of Babylonia, that don't dry up. It's already well established that they're always full of water. And that's why this is mutter. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Cotton Tess. Shaloi Pasku. We're talking about ponds and swamps and irrigation canals that do not dry up. Ritzayna Loimar, what the Mechaber wants to say is, She'enoi Paisik B'shum Pam. They never dry up. Elamoshich Tamid Min Ha'agamim. These irrigation canals are always full of water because they're always taking water from the swamps. V'gam ha'agamim gufa tzarich shelo yipasku tamid. And the ponds and the swamps that feed these irrigation canals never dry up. So what are you doing? You have a field. You have a beis hashlachim. That's a davar ha'oven if you don't water it on Yom Tov. You want to get water from the irrigation canal that's next to your field. You're allowed to do it. Why? Because these irrigation canals never dry up, and the swamps and the ponds that feed them never dry up. If it's talking about a case where sometimes they do dry up, then it would be usher. Because once you're going to start watering your beis hashlachin, if these canals or the swamps that feed them dry up, we're afraid you're going to go do a terchi yisera. You're going to go get buckets and bring water from somewhere else. Avalim darkon livsek b'shum pam, says the Chavetz Chaim. If it's the derech of these irrigation canals or the swamps that sometimes they dry up, after achshav yesh riboy mayim bahen, even if right now you see that, wow, there's a ton of water over here, it's been raining for 3 weeks, the swamps are full, the irrigation canals are full, shebechol Chol HaMoed lo yitztarech lidlois b'dli, you're certain that the whole Chol HaMoed, you could do all the watering you want and you're never going to have to go use a bucket. All you need to do is push out a little ditch with your foot to allow the water to run into your field. It still would be asr for you to do this on Chol HaMoed because of a loy plug. The Chachamim did not differentiate. That's what the words mean. They didn't differentiate in their takanas. You might look and think, wow, there's plenty of water here in the irrigation canals and in the swamps for the whole Chol HaMoed, and then it turns out, and in the end it might turn out that the taka wasn't that way, it dried up, and before you know it, you ended up having to go get a bucket and schlep water and doing a terchi yisera. So we make the takana that you're not allowed to do this. So this heter of Sif Gimel over here, to use these irrigation canals that are fed from ponds and swamps that take rainwater, is only if the irrigation canals never dry up and the swamps and ponds never dry up. Continues the Mechaber on the second line. So too, let's say you have water cisterns. You have water cisterns that fill up from rainwater. And we said, you're not allowed to go water from a water cistern, from a rainwater cistern on Chol HaMoed, because we're afraid you might come to do a terchi yisera. When the water level goes down, you might come to use a bucket. But over here in Sif Gimel, the Mechaber gives us a case where it is mutter. V'chein abreichos, if you have water cisterns, she'amasa mayim oiveres beinehem, where there is a natural spring, there's a natural water source that flows near these water cisterns, mutter lahashkos mehen. Then you are allowed to water using the water from those rainwater cisterns. Says the Mishnah Berurah nice cotton yud, Iveris beinein mutter lahashkos mehen. If a natural water source flows amongst those water cisterns, then you're allowed to water from the water cisterns, not with a bucket. You're allowed to water from the water cisterns if you could just do it without a terchi yisera, by cutting a little irrigation canal with your foot to allow the rainwater to flow out of the cistern to your field. Then it's mutter. Why? Hainu min abreichos al yedei hamshacha. You could water your field from the water cistern by drawing it to your field with your foot. Why is this mutter? In this case, we're not concerned. Dilma Paski, maybe the water level will go down. And either you're going to end up using a bucket to draw water out of the cistern, or the cistern will dry up completely, and you'll end up taking a bucket and bringing water from somewhere else and doing a terchi yisera. Why are we not worried? Because in this particular case, where there's a natural water source right here, the ipaski, if the water cistern dries up, yachalikach me'amasamayim, so you'll draw the water with your foot out of the natural spring, and you won't do a terchi yisera. Vayin bebeis Yosef, the Chofetz Chaim says, take a look at the words of the Beis Yosef. Shakasav b'shem anemuke Yosef b'shem Arayvid, the dafke kisha'amas hamayim nichnas b'seich habrechos. That this is only true if what's happening is that the natural water source, it's not just that you have a water cistern over here and a water cistern over here, and you have a natural spring that runs very close nearby. No, these Rishonim say that the natural water source has to actually empty into the cistern. If it doesn't actually empty into the cistern, even if the natural water source actually runs through your field, it's still prohibited. Because if you're busy using the water cistern, and then the water level in the cistern goes down, you might either end up using a bucket, or you might end up using a bucket to bring water from somewhere else. So the only time it's mutter to use the water from the cistern when there's a natural water source nearby is if the natural water source is actually feeding the cistern, in which case we're not worried that the water level is going to go down too low or that it's going to dry up. The Ritva disagrees with this and he says no. As long as the water source is close by to the field, or according to others to the water cisterns, it's mutter. How about if you have irrigation ditches that take water from a river? When are you allowed to go use these irrigation ditches and water your field from them? Okay, I thought we were going to go a little bit further, but we're going to have to stop over here. So we'll continue Mirz Hashem tomorrow on the third line of the Mechaber, right by the Ois Cut and Yud Aleph for the Mishnah Berurah. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should be Megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shem should send Yeshuas, Refuas, and Parnasa to all those in need. The Rebbeinu Shem should return us to a time of simcha without this tzara that Klal Yisrael is going through. And the Rebbeinu Shem should protect Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael b'chol makom shehem. We should be zeichet to see the Bias Gal Tzedek b'meher of Yameinu b'simcha. Amen.